Poop. I make it, you make it. To many of us in the developed world, our relationship with human waste is about as far removed from this stinky byproduct as any other group in human history. We've become quite spoiled with our flushing toilets that whisk away the leftovers of last night's Taco Bell within seconds. Unless you work in a sewage facility, the idea of being knee-deep in feces probably makes you want to hurl. Unfortunately, for countless generations of humans not born within the last 100 years, that wasn't always the case. For centuries, the human experience was probably like 50% poop. It was in your water, in your streets. While reflexively avoiding excrement is likely an ingrained human instinct, our ability to effectively accomplish this goal has been, and still is, largely dependent on your financial class and standing. Even today, something like 12% of the world's population, nearly a billion people, don't have access to even a rudimentary form of waste disposal, and only about 33% have access to private and safe facilities connected directly to a local sewer. So if it's that bad today, we can only imagine how bad it must have been 1,000 years ago, right? Well, actually, we don't have to imagine. We have a pretty good idea of how bad things were, especially if you weren't part of the ranking nobility. And honestly, even then it was pretty rough. Your average Joe relied on open community pits where everyone just dumped their leftovers without much regard to actual sanitary disposal. Maybe if you were lucky enough to be born into some sort of upper ranking position, you may have had at least access to some sort of private defecation facility, but it would be little more than a primitive outhouse. Some sort of chair over a hole leading to a chamber filled with, well, you get the picture. Ever been to a national park and used one of these? Yeah, like that, but you have a higher chance of leaving with a splinter in your rear. Now there were some outlier civilizations that had remarkably forward-thinking waste disposal. The Romans, being the snooty innovators they were, developed such advanced sewage systems that parts of them are still being used to this day, and the Indus civilization in southern Asia had robust sewers as early as 2500 BCE, but these stand out for a reason. Most, as previously mentioned, were much less dignified. Which brings us to the subject of today's video. On a completely unrelated note, in your opinion, what is the stinkiest way to die? The year is 1184, in what is now the German city of Erfurt. Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI was hosting a Hoftag, which is just old speak for informal meeting with the king, in St. Peter's Church, which sits alongside the Erfurt Cathedral. There was political tension brewing in the area between a feudal lord and a high-ranking bishop that Henry was attempting to squash before it spiraled completely out of control. This particular meeting was quite large, numbering somewhere around 100 attendees, and on the morning of July 26th they gathered somewhere within the church. Now reports are a little murky as to exactly where the meeting was taking place, but we definitely know it was on a second story of some sort, given the events that would follow. St. Peter's Church, being a medieval building of at least some significance, was outfitted with a luxury version of the medieval privy that hung over the side of the wall and was typically deposited directly into the castle's surrounding moat. Unfortunately, from what I understand, St. Peter's Church latrines instead dropped into what I can only describe as a medieval septic tank that was purpose-built to contain all of the building's waste. I can't imagine this was ever seriously cleaned, which again, is very unfortunate. So there we are, at the 12th century equivalent of an HOA meeting, name-calling and death threats probably included. Over 100 fully grown men gathered to begin their meeting, before suddenly, without warning, the entire floor gives way, dropping most of the noblemen directly into the cesspit of feces below them. I can only imagine the abject horror these men went through realizing that not only were they falling, probably not an insignificant distance, but also that they were falling directly into a soup of human waste. At least 60 died from either falling debris, drowning in filth, or a combination of both, although some estimates put the death toll closer to 100. As luck would have it, King Henry was standing in an alcove at the time of the floor's collapse, and was able to hold on until rescue. Historians theorize that had the Holy Roman Emperor drowned in sewage that day, the Holy Roman Empire may have collapsed a whole 600 years earlier due to everybody being too embarrassed to carry onward. Well, that's pretty much the end of the story. Both the feuding nobleman and bishop ended up surviving the ordeal, but Henry VI apparently left town directly following the disaster, so their grievances remained unsettled. There's actually no conclusion at all that I can find regarding what happened between the two of them, but I like to imagine that they were able to settle their differences through a shared trauma of almost suffocating to death in poo. That's all for now. As always, thanks for watching.